All right, and we are live. Welcome everyone watching. This is a conversation between Jay Bang and Kevin O'Leary about Jay's company, Future Cardia. So while we're waiting, let's give people a minute to join the stream. If everyone wants to write in where they're watching from, that'd be great. Jay, Kevin, where are you guys calling from today?
I'm in Minneapolis, the motherland. This is where all the pacemakers and defibrillator technologists are, and all our engineers are here.
And I'm in Miami.
Oh,
where
I
all the
live in
money,
Tampa,
where all the
Florida.
money is.
All the money is. Well, I live in Tampa, Florida. So
I
not too far from
understand.
me. Yeah.
Very nice. All right. Well, I think we have a good amount of people here. So, yeah, without any further ado, let's get started. So, Jay, very briefly, do you want to just introduce yourself and Future Cardia for the crowd and for Kevin before we start diving into questions?
Sure. So my background is in implantable cardiac devices for the past 20 years. Worked for major corporations, worked for startups, also worked for a private equity funded company. We had a major exit, a $16 billion exit on a company that I worked for, and two startups went IPO. Worked for a company in Europe, ran the operations there, and then started my own implantable cardiac devices company about 4 years ago.
Very nice. And for everyone watching, it's we're not just talking about Jay's company, Future Cardia, here, but we are actually discussing it while they have an open round of investment on Start Engine. So, you can see the link invest.futurecardia.com, and you can head to that link to learn more about investing. So, great background on you. Do you want to start diving into exactly, what is Future Cardia and what are you guys doing right now?
Sure. So the market right now for heart failure and arrhythmia is pretty big. It's collectively about $6 to $7 billion annual market. So, and also it's a limited players. So there's only three major Goliath in this industry, and with the fourth player in this space. So we're developing a tiny implantable cardiac monitor that will implant under the skin. It's a 2-minute office procedure. It collects the ECG, heart sound, and other cardiac data and send that information to the phone to the cloud, and the physician will access that information remotely and securely, and then check for trending changes in cardiac performance for these patients.
That all sounds awesome. And, something we had discussed earlier is that cardiovascular diseases is one of the leading causes of death worldwide pretty consistently year over year. What are the current limitations that other devices or implants are currently facing? What's the technology limitations, and how does Future Cardia solve some of these problems and, the potential outlook on future implantations?
Sure. So right now, the gold standard for long-term monitoring for heart failure is what we call deep implant. So these are cardiac cath lab procedures. So they make a incision through your groin, cross the heart, into the heart, and implant a tiny sensor. And that measures the trending changes in pressure, cardiac pressure, for long term. So that's what the gold standard is. And as the technology is advancing, we're slowly implanting this under the skin and getting similar type of data so that we can monitor these patients similarly, but much simpler and a lot cost efficiently.
That's great. And Kevin, when you're thinking about investment opportunities in the health tech space, generally, what are you looking for? What are indicators of, hey, this is something that's going to give me confidence? And then specifically moving into the medical device space, are you looking for total addressable market? Are you looking for, speed to market? What do you look for when you're evaluating potential opportunities?
Well, when investing in medical devices or healthcare generally, most of the investment pressure is on cost reduction. It doesn't matter where you are in the stack. You could be in pharma, you can be in medical devices, hip replacements, whatever it is, the entire system is looking for productivity, efficiency, and cost reduction. And the new administration is putting even more pressure on that. So companies like this that can simplify the procedure as opposed to going up the groin, as Jay described earlier, to simply inserting under the skin is going to save time, save money, save a lot of money, and be able to implement more customers faster. As long as the resolution of the information is equivalent and useful to the doctors, and it's going to be addressed immediately as a cost saver, which that's huge. But the other thing is this market's never going away. Heart health and managing heart disease has been around for hundreds of years. And so, it's also an innovation on a platform that never goes away. So you want that too. It's different than, I invest in biotech and new molecules, and we have to go through the regulatory approval. I did the same thing with psychedelics. And those are, markets that are emerging. They're in clinical stage 2 trials. Devices like this that address already existing markets tend not to be as speculative. I'm not saying they don't have their trials and tribulations, but this isn't like psychedelics where it's binary.
Right.
And so you lose all your money or you do very, very well. You just don't know. So this deserves to be in a portfolio of med tech. There's no question about it. With the added bonus, clearly it saves money, but that is the whole deal these days.
Right. So actually what Kevin's saying is 100% true. So the deep implants cost about $20,000 to $25,000 to implant something like that. Our retail price is $5,000, and we do this on the outpatient basis. So the cost saving is tremendous. And also we're a fast follower. So we have 2 other predicates that are paving the way for us. So we are following that exact same path to get to that space. And it is very, of course, it's an ultra competitive space, but we have a limited players. So it's 3 major players, and then we are coming in with a slightly different approach. And like Kevin said, cost efficiency. So put this into perspective. To have a specialized chip just for this is $20 million. And we completely bypassed it. And when I say $20 million, it takes about 5 to 7 years to develop it, and another 5 years for the clinical trial. So by the time they get to the market, they're already 10 years behind in their specialized chips. Ours is super fast, off the shelf. Instead of $20 million in 10 years, we're doing it for about $10 in a couple days. And of course, because the chip is evolving, we can switch out to the better chip every year, which the other guys cannot because they have the specialized chip just for themselves.
That's great. And going back to a few of the points both of you touched on in terms of time saving, cost saving, also just how big this market is and how it's never going away. A lot of companies are starting to develop external wearable devices. People are wearing their Apple Watches to monitor cardio health or cardiovascular health, and other bands and watches and straps. What is the benefit of going with one of those external wearable devices versus something like an implant that your company would prescribe? And what situations would call for, hey, this is just a situation where you want something external, and hey, this is actually much more serious, you might need an internal implant?
Yeah, so wearables are ideal for short term. So anybody who has any type of cardiac conditions, they would either get a Holter monitor, which is good for 24 hours, or an external patch that's good for maybe 1 to 2 weeks. And I would argue maybe you should do it more than once, just so that you have a complete data for long term. But the problem with those short-term monitoring for a long-term problem is exactly that. It's like having a short-term, insurance when you need a permanent insurance kind of situation. So I work with the cardiac patients for the past 20 years, and they'll be the first one to tell you, I got this great Apple Watch. What does it tell you? Oh, same thing that I already know. So what does it do for you? Nothing really. I know what I have, and it tells me when I have it, and that's it. It doesn't change my medication. It doesn't change anything that I do. So it's very helpful for that. But in terms of a long-term monitoring, still the gold standard is to implant inside the heart. So we're trying to change that. Another thing is from a physician's perspective, they cannot rely on a consumer device. So if a patient says, I saw something on my watch, what do I do? Well, you got to come in and we do the whole thing all over again. And at that time, I don't see anything. So we got to keep doing this again and again. So it becomes more cumbersome for the patients and physicians when they have a false positive information.
And, like Jay was saying, Kevin, this is very much a battle of short-term monitoring versus long-term monitoring and cost savings. when you think about these medical tech investments that you were talking about, whether it's biotech or whether it's something that's a device, how do you balance your investment horizons with those long timelines that it could take for certain companies to get to market with those regulatory approvals that you had mentioned earlier?
Yeah, but I want to speak to the issue around the device itself for a second, because I am I'm very involved in longevity research. I invest in that space, and I'm also live by it as well. And so I'm not a diabetic, but I wear a glucose monitor for the specific reason attached to my phone of keeping my glucose between 70 and 150, 98% of the day and the month and the year. So I'm within that range because there's a lot of evidence that shows that glucose spiking is a form of diabetes to the brain. It damages brain health. So I have to staple one of these things into my side every 10 days, like every diabetic does. And this is for me a long-term situation because I always want to monitor glucose. It's a total pain in the ass. If there was, because the devices, and look, I've got the best on the market, the Dextron 7, and they advance the technology every 36 months. But I don't want to have to keep doing this over and over. If you gave me the option to insert a chip under my skin for a whole year, I'd much rather do that because I want the information all the time. So this solution, I can't stress enough how important that is, because yeah, if you're just coming out of a heart attack or something and you're wearing a device, you don't want to wear a device. You want it embedded. That's what you want, because it becomes a lot easier to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And the failure rate of stapling devices or portable devices can be as high as 30%. I've stapled one of these to my side, and after it's warmed up, boom, this is a defective unit. It really pisses me off. So once you've got the right device in your skin, you don't deal with it for the next year. That's tremendous consumer value right there. And Jay talked about it. But I'm talking about it as a user. Now, speed to market really matters because you're burning cash until you get, customers buying it. But then you have to look at that specific metric. You look at the CEO. Great idea, but does he have executional excellence? Is there any evidence that he's ever done this before? And in this guy's case, there is. And so that de-risks it even more. And I look at that a lot because you really have to know the market, the timelines, and your burn rate and everything else. But from my perspective, this is a good idea, but I really like the consumer application to it. This is so much better than wearing a device, just period.
Yeah. Actually, Kevin, that's a very good point. We're not quite there yet, but that's very much on my radar. I'm using a continuous glucose monitoring as an example. It wasn't too long ago, I would say maybe 15, 20 years ago, patients weren't even allowed to check their own blood sugar. So the emergency room was inundated with hyperglycemia, hypoglycemia, and then now the patients have the control to manage it. And now it's even better. Even consumers like yourself are putting that little patch, the little needle into your skin to measure that. So I think we learned a lot from that transition from this core medical device to consumer side. So we're absolutely looking into that. And because of our battery technology, it's actually, as of today, it's a 2-year battery. We're getting a 5-year battery in 6 months. So
okay, put me in the trials for that one. I'll be your guinea pig. I will definitely. 24 months would be fantastic. Fantastic.
Yeah, that's right now. So the new battery will give us 5 years, and the new chip will give us another maybe 20% increase. So hopefully we'll get 6-year device, and that's a big number for heart failure patients because we measure.
So what's going to happen, Jay, to your company is if you prove out these technologies and you start to scale, you'll get acquired by the big medical device guys. That's what's going to happen.
I think that, as a startup, medical device startups, that is the goal. And, working for 2 startup companies, they only have 3 customers, those 3 big medical device giants. And, you get good data and you hope for the best. And for us, I want to kind of deviate from that. We get the good data, but not hope for the best. We want to go commercialization. It's 510K, it's class 2. We're not delivering a therapy. We're monitoring. So we are lower class in terms of the FDA clearance barrier.
That's a faster path to market.
Much faster. It's usually 6 months to a year of due diligence from the FDA side. So we're very close to submitting our application to the FDA. So yeah, it's not going to be an earth-shattering number on the first, second year, but as an implantable bioelectric devices, there's only three players in the space. So we have a tremendous value proposition for the patients and physicians. And because we have a predicate device, we're not reinventing the training. The nurses know how to do this. Physicians know how to implant this. And this is a very exclusive niche market called electrophysiologists. So these are the subspecialty of cardiologists that implant pacemakers and defibrillators. And there's only 3,000 of them in the country. So we'll focus on those physicians. And even bigger scale would be the heart failure physicians. And they will be able to, they're not traditionally implanting physicians, but something this simple, they can implant in the office. So we'll not only expand the market, but grow the pie as well.
And Jay, on that topic, I know we've touched a little bit on trials. I know you mentioned kind of a little bit of where you're at in the FDA process. Have doctors actually tested this? Have any patients, received these monitors? And where are you at in that stage of the life cycle? Whether it's in the US or, global, the heart disease market is much bigger than just the United States.
Sure. So in terms of execution, traditional bioelectric implantable companies, it takes them maybe 7 years or so to get to a human implant. We did this from ideation to human implant under 4 years. And instead of implanting, 5 patients or so, we did 39 patients in 5 months. So we have a deep implant company that we're competing against. They raised $250 million. We implanted more in 5 months than they did in 5 years. So, of course, it's a simpler procedure. So that is helpful for the patients and physicians. So our goal is to submit our data findings to the FDA this year and get to the clearance.
And jumping over to the actual offering and round that you have open on Start Engine, Kevin mentioned some of these medical device companies take tons and tons of capital, hundreds of millions or tens of millions of dollars just to get to market. And, you have not raised hundreds of millions per se, but you're pretty close to market and you've gotten pretty close. Why did you choose equity crowdfunding? What is your fundraising journey? And, how do you see this evolving and changing the way that medical tech companies are raising capital?
Yeah, I think I'm a prototypical Silicon Valley guy. Worked for 2 startup companies in Silicon Valley for almost 15 years. I think I know all the notable VCs in my space. And even when I started this company, that was my route. I had a great pitch deck. I had a significant investment offer on a pitch deck. I actually turned it down and went with the angel investors. I knew I could raise about $8 million directly from the angels, and that's what we did. So I was up to about $4 million in investment, and I said, well, why don't we try equity crowdfunding? It'll be a nice little supplement to what we're doing. And a $14 million raise, and we were able to move efficiently and get to this point. So this was a tremendous discovery that I did not think about. So it turned out to be the best thing.
That's great to hear. And Kevin, you've been a strong advocate of equity crowdfunding. You've been, part of Start Engine for several years now. What do you think retail investors, having access to high growth medical tech companies like Future Cardia, what does that mean for the industry? What should they be looking for? And why should they be excited about opportunities like this?
Well, I like it obviously because it democratizes investment in venture. And I've always believed, and I've told investors that have a portion of their portfolio in venture, you need multiple situations. You can't just bet it all on one company. You should have 7 to 10 in your portfolio. And so Start Engine provides that. You can scrutinize deals like this. Obviously, Start Engine, of which I'm a shareholder and a paid spokesperson, just to disclose that. This was a very important platform for our Shark Tank companies who have even more nascent ideas than this very, very early. And so what I love about it is you're not put in some situation where a traditional venture capital company has a super preference over you,
yep.
which I've always detested. It democratizes it. You're aligned with the founder, the CEO, and it's totally transparent. You know exactly what you're getting. And frankly, that's what it should be, because if you like this story and you like the jockey in Jay, because there's a lot to like about him.
Thank you.
You set your position up and you ride the story, and you want diversification across all sectors, and this medical device sector is in the spotlight in this administration. For the next 4 years, you're going to hear so much about efficiency and cost cutting in healthcare and scrutiny and transparency and technology. I mean, it's the right time at the right place with a device that's in a market that's forever. And the prospects down the road of doing this chip technology and other monitoring like glucose we just discussed is very attractive. I mean, that's just, but there's not a whole lot not to like here. And if the question is, do you want to invest in this sector? Is there anything better than this? I'd say you'd have a hard time finding it. So it's probably a good bet. Deserves to be in the portfolio. But and what I like is Start Engine is getting better and better and better in actually curating deals like this one, which really matters.
Thank you, Kevin. Another thing is I know we're an implantable device company, but there's a huge play in the data. So when I talk about the deep implants, they're not measuring the heart. They're measuring the derivative of the heart information, the pressure. Whereas our case, we're measuring ECG, the electrical aspect of the heart, and heart sound, the mechanical aspect of the heart. So when you combine these two modalities, it becomes a tremendous tool. So imagine just the ECG alone at a doctor's office. That can tell a lot about you just by having that ECG. Now we're combining that with the heart sounds. So this really becomes a data play for us. What we call a deep analytics. We're not quite there yet with the AI, but our goal is to gather as much data as possible and check for trending changes in cardiac performance. So in 5 months of implant, we've been advertising for 60,000 hours, but we're almost at 100,000 hours of cardiac data right now. So we have enough data to train our model to bring value to our patients and physicians. And another thing, these doctors and nurses are so busy with everything, they cannot be inundated with a whole bunch of data dump. So we're going to have some type of a risk stratification, like a red light, yellow light, green light. That's it. And we monitor it. And before anything happens to these patients, we catch it before and steer them away from hospitalizations.
And I know we've talked a little bit about, what Future Cardia is looking to do, going for certain approvals, doing more testing. Over the next 12 to 24 months, what are your goals, and what is the capital you're raising actually going to do to support you reaching those milestones?
Yeah, so submission is a milestone in our industry. You can't just write a letter to the FDA. It's a massive, massive undertaking. So submission is our goal. We were planning to do it this month, but we're going to do additional testing just to validate some of our ECGs, and that will actually save us time in the long run. So our goal is to submit to the FDA by middle of this year, maybe fall of this year, and then get the FDA approval by end of this year, or maybe beginning of next year. So that's it.
Simple, easy. All right. Well, we have a few questions from the viewers in the crowd, so I'm going to start reading those off. And Jay, Kevin, both of you, all welcome you to tackle these. I think this one is more upfront for Jay. So how does your product compare to the Medtronic Link 2 that is also implanted under the skin?
Yeah, then that's the important part for us. So Medtronic Link is a great device. They're our predicate. They are very good device. However, it's smaller. So they have a weaker antenna. So the connection is not as good as ours. And the ECG is not clear. And also the cost of their manufacturing is much, much higher. So we're delivering a competitive device without compromising implant time and patient comfort. And our device is a platform. So the reason we chose this size is because we have a massive battery, like 10 times more battery power than anything out there. And that can only be achieved by size. There's no special technology that can surpass that. And our ability to expand. So we have enough size that will give us the oxygen saturation, and then the optical sensor that would, I'm not there yet, but maybe getting to the blood glucose monitoring and blood pressure monitoring. We're not there yet, but those are some of the things that we're looking at. So already as a Gen 1 device, we have ECG and heart sound capabilities, activity capabilities, and one capability called impedance that we turned that off for the simplicity. So on a second gen device, we're going to have more capabilities that the other companies cannot have.
Got it. And one question we're getting from a whole bunch of viewers right now is what issues, what diseases, what what can the device actually detect aside from just collecting data? Are there signals it can provide that says, hey, your numbers are XYZ, you should go see a doctor as you might have some sort of illness, some sort of recurring disease or
Right. So the first goal is to get the atrial fibrillation monitoring under our belt. So that will give us, so the device is checking every single heartbeat. Imagine you have a 60 beats per minute in average. Our device is watching every single beat. And as that beat becomes irregular, it's going to say, well, something's not right. We're going to start recording. So we're going to achieve that goal first. And then the heart failure is another problem. So heart failure patients have a weakened heart muscle, completely different from atrial fibrillation. So the weakened heart muscle is not pumping well, fluid is accumulated in the lungs. So you're sick, but how sick are you? That's the problem. That's the $40 billion a year problem for the hospital systems. So our device will check for trending changes as the heart performance goes down. We're going to monitor it and let the physicians know that instead of sending this patient to the ER blindly, have them come to the office sometime next week. That's the approach. And beyond that, we are also looking at the sleep apnea, chronic pulmonary obstructive diseases. So those are other things that we're looking at. But the first goal is atrial fibrillation monitoring and heart failure monitoring, which is about $6 billion a year business.
Got it. It seems like we're getting a few more technical questions here for Jay. So, how does the device actually transmit the reporting? It's in someone's body. Where is it going to? Is the data going directly to the consumer? Is it going to the doctor? And, as a company yourself, how are you actually going out and working with companies? Are you working with the doctors and helping them analyze the data? Are you sending this data right to the consumers and, giving them guidance? What does that all look like?
Right. So from the FDA's and the market norm, all the data goes to the phone to the cloud, and the physician looks at that. And because it's not an emergency, we're looking for chronic trending changes. Physician may look at it today, tomorrow, sometime this week, and act on it for next week. So that is the market norm. And in terms of the patient interaction, what I've learned from previous devices that I worked on is when you give too much information to the patients, either you're going to get too much interaction, too much false alarms, or no alarms. So we have about 30% of the population that will say, I'm not going to deal with it. And then we have 30% that says, I'm going to click on this 100 times a day. So it really doesn't help the patient. It creates more anxiety for the patients. So we're going to give this data analytics to the clinicians, and they will act on that for the patient.
Got it. I know we have.
And also the connection. That is one big key for us. The smaller the antenna, harder it is to communicate. We got the biggest antenna in the industry. Just physics. There's no massive science behind it. Bigger antenna is better for communication. So our device will communicate with the phone and then send that data to the physicians.
And we have about one or two more questions here before we start wrapping it up. So, Kevin, one question for you is, are there certain types of business models within the health tech, within the medical tech space that you're looking for? Are you more concerned with, like Jay started talking about, hey, we're going to have all this data that we can start utilizing, producing new models, producing new products, or are you more focused on what the actual and original device or product that they were selling, can do?
You always focus on the first release because that's what you invested in to get it out the door. If it's successful, you look for what's next. It's binary, one at a time. It's always that way. The last thing you want is all of a sudden the initiative on this, which sounds very promising, to somehow be derailed by, it's a classic, dog with a bone in its mouth looking at a river. It sees its image and wants the other bone too and drops the first one. You don't want that. You want this company to deliver on this first device and then look for other opportunities, because there's an immediate binary lift in valuation as soon as it's successful. And it's an oligopoly market, which is great. I mean, you don't have 50 guys you're competing with here. If you've got something more efficient, lower cost that reduces, patient time with this very minor surgery, that's going to get adopted pretty quickly within the medical system, because it checks the box on all the pressure they have for productivity, throughput of patients, cost reduction, all that. It hits it everywhere. As long as the resolution of the data is good enough for the physician, it checks every box.
Thanks, Kevin. Actually, that's a really good point. I talk about this all the time with the investors. Yes, it's ultra competitive space, but then what is it? Anything that brings value to users, patients, and physicians is going to be ultra competitive, and that is just the nature of the business. However, this is limited players because the barrier to entry is so high, the technology barrier, and to get this kind of battery is not for everybody. And oligarchy, I call it monopoly or cartel system. That's it. There's only 2 battery companies in the world that can build this, and they don't deal with startup companies like ours. But this time they do. So we got that contract. The physicians, we call it a subscription business because the number of the implants that these physicians do doesn't change over year. Whether you're, 40-year-old physician or 60-year-old physician, the number of patients they treat are exactly the same until they retire. So we call it a subscription business on top of that. And it's fragmented. We've got this major hospital chains where that's a great place if you need a heart transplant. But if you need a under the skin 2-minute office procedure, can be done anywhere else other than that. So we have a huge patient population and the physicians that can benefit from this.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Jay, both so much for your time. Remember, if you're interested in learning more about Future Cardia, if you want to ask Jay more questions, you could head to invest.futurecardia.com and learn more about the company and the investment opportunity. But thanks everyone for joining, and have a great rest of your day.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much for your time, Kevin. Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate it.